She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The way she walked in, barefoot, toes curling on the floor like she owned every breath I'd ever take, made me forget how to move or breathe. And when her foot brushed against me, God help me, I let it. Welcome to Goddess Foot Confessions. Let's uncover what really happened. The door creaked as it opened, and I froze. My heart hammered in my chest, louder than the low hum of the house. For a moment, time felt like it had stopped. I hadn't expected anyone, let alone her, but there she was. She walked in barefoot, each step deliberate, her presence filling the space before she even crossed the threshold. My eyes followed her as she moved with a grace I could barely comprehend, the softness of her steps almost inaudible. The cool air from outside clung to her skin, and I couldn't help but notice how the light hit her in all the right places, casting long shadows on her as she passed. I stood frozen, unsure of what to say or how to move. The room felt suddenly too small, too tight around me. Her eyes met mine briefly, but she said nothing, just the quiet sound of her bare feet on the wooden floor, like the world had quieted just for her. She was all I could focus on. Her presence filled the space between us, pulling me closer without a single word spoken. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, but it was her feet that caught my attention. The way her toes curled slightly with each step, the soft arch of her feet, as though they were meant to move through the world like this, bare and unguarded. It felt like a challenge. She was unashamed, and that made me feel exposed. The weight of her gaze lingered for just a second longer than necessary, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. I didn't know how to respond, how to break the silence. All I knew was that in this moment, nothing had ever felt so electric, so impossible. She moved past me, and I couldn't stop myself from glancing at her feet as they brushed past, barely grazing the edge of my calf. My pulse quickened, a reaction I couldn't suppress. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words stuck, caught in the knot that had suddenly formed in my chest. She took another step, and all I could do was watch. The room was silent except for the faint rustle of fabric as she settled onto the couch. I could still feel the heat from her steps lingering in the air, an almost tangible presence that filled the space between us. My heart was racing, and I tried to focus on anything other than the quiet tension that hummed around us. She sat there, bare feet tucked under her, the subtle curve of her ankles exposed. I could see the soft indentations of her toes against the fabric of the cushions, a contrast to the sharp, tight knot of nerves in my own stomach. She looked at me, but not directly. Her eyes were soft, distant, as though she was lost in her own thoughts. I should have said something, anything, but the words felt too heavy, too loaded with unspoken meaning. Instead, I found myself watching her. It wasn't just the way she looked, her bare feet resting casually on the couch or the curve of her neck as she leaned back into the cushions. It was the way she moved through the space with a quiet confidence, as if she belonged here, as if this was all completely natural. The silence between us stretched, comfortable yet unsettling. I could feel her presence all around me, the subtle way she filled the space with an energy that was both calming and electrifying. My eyes drifted again to her feet, the way they flexed slightly when she shifted, the arch of her toes visible beneath the soft, worn fabric of her jeans. I could almost hear the whisper of the floor beneath her feet as they shifted, the faintest sound of her skin brushing the surface. It wasn't just the physical proximity that made my heart race. It was the unspoken intimacy in the stillness, the way her quiet presence made everything feel more intense, more real. I could feel myself drawn to her, not just in the way I watched her, but in the space she created around me. A space that felt both inviting and impossible to cross. And yet, with every passing moment, it seemed more inevitable. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier with unspoken words. She hadn't moved, but I could feel her eyes on me, even when she didn't look directly. It was as if she had a way of drawing my attention without even trying. I could feel the pull of her, the way her presence stretched across the room, filling every inch of the space with something undefined, something impossible to ignore. I glanced at her again, and this time, She caught my gaze. The brief flicker of a smile danced at the corner of her lips, but it wasn't playful. It was something more, something deeper, like she knew something I didn't. Her eyes softened, just for a moment, and in that look I saw something shift, something fragile like a wall that had cracked just slightly. Her feet were tucked under her again, and I noticed the way her toes flexed as she shifted. A subtle movement, almost too small to catch, but it was there. The way her bare skin pressed against the fabric of the couch, the way her foot brushed against the hem of her jeans, it was a reminder of just how close we were, how easily the space between us could vanish. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. But there was no denying the tension, the undeniable pull that was growing stronger with every passing second. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was something else, a silent understanding, an acknowledgement of the space we were in. I felt myself drawn to her, to the way she sat there, vulnerable in her stillness, and yet holding a power I couldn't define. For a second, my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. But when I looked at her, all I could see was the curve of her foot as it slipped slightly from beneath her, the light catching her skin in a way that made everything else seem distant. I tried to focus on something, anything else, but I couldn't. Not when she was like this, not when she felt so close, and yet so far away. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for something, and yet unsure what that something would be. The silence between us was thick now, almost oppressive. I could feel it pressing down on me, a constant reminder of the space we shared but never acknowledged aloud. Her eyes never left me for long, but they were careful, calculating in a way that made my pulse quicken. It was as if she was watching, studying, seeing me in a way I wasn't ready to be seen. Her feet were still tucked under her, but now I could see her toes moving, flexing slightly, stretching with the rhythm of her breathing. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but it caught my attention. I couldn't stop looking. The way the arch of her foot curved so naturally, the soft lines of her skin as her foot shifted with a delicate grace that made my throat tighten. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to focus on anything but her. The tension was unbearable, a weight that hung between us. I could feel her energy in the room, how she seemed to fill every corner with her presence. There was something magnetic about her, something raw in the way she held herself, and it left me in a constant state of wanting. I wasn't sure what I wanted, but it didn't matter. Her proximity alone was enough to make my heart race, my breath shallow. I couldn't look away. She was so close now, and yet still, she kept a distance I couldn't cross. The faint scent of her skin, the soft whisper of her movements, it was all too much. I wanted to reach out, to break the silence, to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. It felt like a game, an unspoken challenge I wasn't sure I was ready to play. Her foot shifted again, brushing against the hem of her pants. My body tensed, an involuntary reaction to the softest contact, and my breath hitched. The subtlety of it was maddening. She hadn't even looked at me when it happened, but I felt it. I felt every inch of it. And in that moment, the tension between us shifted, deepened, as if we were both waiting for the next step, but neither of us was willing to make it. The room was still, but now there was a different quality to the air. It was no longer just the silence between us. It was the quiet before something that neither of us could name. She sat there, relaxed, her eyes half closed, as though she was lost in the soft hum of the moment. My gaze kept drifting to her, the way she moved so naturally, the subtle grace in everything she did. I noticed her foot again. It was out from under her, resting on the floor, her toes barely touching the surface as if she was testing it, letting the coolness of the room seep into her skin. The arch of her foot was soft, the gentle curve drawing my attention, and for the first time, I realized how much of her presence had affected me. It wasn't just the way she looked or moved, it was the way she made me feel like everything else faded away when she was near. I wanted to look away, to stop myself from following the subtle movements of her bare feet, but I couldn't. It was impossible. The softness of her skin, the vulnerability in the way she rested there, was too inviting. And then, without warning, she shifted. Her foot brushed against my leg, light as a whisper, but the effect was immediate. I froze, my breath caught in my chest, unsure of what to do or how to react. It wasn't an accident. It couldn't have been. The way her toes lingered for just a second longer than necessary, the soft pressure against my thigh. It was like a spark, a charge that ran through me. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. The world outside of this moment seemed to vanish, and all I could focus on was the feel of her touch, the warmth of her skin against mine, however fleeting. My heart was pounding, and my whole body seemed to hum with a need I couldn't place. Her foot shifted again, gently pressing against me, as if to remind me she was still there. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to say something, do something, but all I could do was hold my breath and wait. The softest touch, yet it had shaken me to my core. The silence between us felt like a tangible thing, hanging in the air, thick with unspoken words and unacknowledged desires. I could feel her presence in every corner of the room, yet we still hadn't moved any closer. The space between us felt both vast and suffocating, as though neither of us was ready to cross that invisible line. She hadn't spoken since that soft touch, and neither had I. The only sound was the gentle rhythm of our breathing, the occasional shift of fabric as she made herself more comfortable. I kept my gaze fixed ahead, but every time I stole a glance at her, I couldn't help but notice how natural she seemed in her stillness, how she didn't need to fill the silence with words, how her mere presence was enough to fill the room. Her feet were resting again, this time more firmly on the ground, but her toes flexed ever so slightly, as if they too were caught in the tension of the moment. I found myself drawn to the subtle movements, the way her bare skin brushed against the floor, the way her foot seemed to carry its own quiet power. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance between us, but I held myself back, unsure if it was my place, unsure of what it would mean. I could feel the weight of her gaze now, the way it lingered just slightly too long on me. But still she said nothing. I couldn't read her. Her face was calm, her eyes unreadable. The mystery of it only deepened the silence, turning it into something heavier, more intense. Every small movement she made, every shift of her body, felt like an invitation, a question left hanging in the air, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure I could give. The space between us was unbearable, yet neither of us was willing to fill it with words. All I could do was wait, feeling every second stretch out longer than the last, feeling the tension grow as it always did between us, silent, unspoken, but so deeply understood. The tension between us had shifted, deepened, yet still there was no breaking of the silence. I couldn't help but notice how she had subtly changed the atmosphere, without even trying. It was in the way she sat, the way she held herself, like she was waiting, yet completely at ease in the space between us. And despite the stillness, despite the quiet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being offered, something barely perceptible, yet undeniable. She had shifted again, just a small movement, but it was enough to catch my attention. Her feet, bare and delicate, now rested casually in front of her, toes slightly curled, the soft arches exposed in the low light. She was close enough that I could hear the subtle rustle of fabric, her soft breath filling the space. But it wasn't just that. It was the way her body language spoke without words, how she had arranged herself, how her bare feet were now placed just far enough from me to feel the heat of her skin, yet still close enough to make me question the distance. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. My eyes kept drifting, unable to focus on anything other than the soft curve of her foot, the way it seemed to beckon me without any overt gesture. She wasn't looking at me, but I felt her presence more than ever. She was pulling me in without saying a word. The subtle flex of her toes, the soft brush of her foot against the edge of her pants. It was all so small, so subtle, but it held me captive. My breath caught as she slowly moved her foot closer to mine. It was a small shift, but it felt significant. She hadn't looked at me, but I could feel the invitation, feel it in the air between us like a current, unspoken but there. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with it, but the urge to close the gap, to follow the invitation, was overwhelming. And yet, I stayed still, afraid to move, afraid to risk breaking the fragile silence. I could feel her every movement, each step she took in this delicate dance between us, as if the world around us had slowed to match her pace. The silence had shifted again, becoming less oppressive and more like an unspoken agreement. Every time she shifted, every breath she took, it reverberated through the room, stirring something deep inside me that I hadn't expected. She moved just slightly, her feet brushing the floor once more, the arch of her toes flexing gently as if testing the space between us. It was subtle, but it wasn't an accident. I could feel her body language drawing me in, urging me to move with her, to acknowledge the space we shared. I couldn't look away from the way her foot rested against the floor, the curve of her toes flexing and releasing. Every small motion felt like a signal, one I couldn't ignore. The room felt charged, and with each shift she made, I could feel the pull of her presence intensifying. Her bare feet, so effortlessly beautiful in their simplicity, moved with a kind of grace that made my chest tighten. It wasn't just the way her toes curled, the arch of her foot exposed in the soft light. It was the way she carried herself, as though every step she took was deliberate, every movement a conversation we weren't having out loud. I shifted in my seat, my heart beating faster now, the pull of her movement almost unbearable. She didn't look at me, but I felt her eyes on me, felt her awareness like an electric current in the space between us. Every step she took was felt, not just in the physical sense, but in a deeper, more visceral way. It was as if her every motion left an imprint on me, an invitation I couldn't deny. I could feel my own breath catch as she shifted again, her bare feet brushing against the floor, the faintest movement, but enough to make my pulse race. The room had become a battlefield, every moment carrying weight, every step she took drawing me in just a little further. I couldn't look away, couldn't pull myself from the space we were sharing, as fragile as it was. The room felt heavy now, as though the air itself had thickened with the unsaid. Her presence was like a quiet flame, something soft and warm, yet intense enough to make the space feel too small for the both of us. She hadn't moved much, but every small shift of her body, every slight flex of her feet, seemed to pull me in just a little further. There was something about her, something almost intangible, that I couldn't look away from. I found myself drawn to her feet again, the way her toes curled slightly as she adjusted herself. It was so subtle, so quiet, but it made something stir inside me, a yearning I hadn't expected. I wasn't sure what it was, but it was there, building with every passing second, like a quiet pull that I couldn't resist. Her feet, bare and delicate, seemed to speak to me in a language I wasn't sure I understood, yet I couldn't help but listen. Her eyes were distant now, lost in thought, but I could still feel the weight of her gaze in the room. It wasn't directed at me, but it felt like I was still the center of her focus, like every breath I took was somehow tied to her. The silence between us had changed, thickened with something unspoken, something I didn't know how to define. I could feel the quiet yearning rising inside me, pulling at me like a current I couldn't fight. It wasn't something loud or obvious. It was a soft ache, a pull towards something just beyond reach. She wasn't saying anything, wasn't giving me any real indication of what she wanted, but everything about her, from the way she sat to the way she moved, felt like an invitation. I shifted in my seat again, my body betraying me with the sudden tension I felt building. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the need to close the space between us almost overwhelming. But I stayed still, unsure of how to act on the quiet yearning that had settled between us, unsure of whether I was ready to face what I felt stirring inside me. The air seemed to hum in the wake of her presence, the space around me still buzzing with the echo of every quiet moment we'd shared. She hadn't said a word, yet I could feel the weight of her in everything. The way the room had changed, the way my pulse quickened every time I thought about her, even in the smallest movement she made. It was as if she had left a mark on the air itself, a trace of her that lingered in the silence. I sat there, unable to move, unable to do anything but feel the lingering effect of her proximity. I could still see her in my mind, the way her feet had shifted, the curve of her toes, the soft arch of her foot that had been so close to mine. It was something so small, but it had stayed with me. Her bare skin brushing the air, the way it seemed to invite me, without saying a word. It had shaken me, not in a sudden jolt, but in a steady, continuous pull that hadn't let go since the moment she walked into the room. I could still feel the faintest trace of her energy in the room, like a presence that hadn't quite left. She was somewhere just beyond my reach, her silence filling the space with something that felt both heavy and comforting. There was a longing, too, something that thrummed beneath the surface, a quiet ache that I hadn't expected to feel. I wasn't sure if it was because she had drawn so much of my attention, or because I hadn't been able to figure out what this feeling was. Every breath I took seemed to be colored by the memory of her presence, the way her feet had brushed against the floor, the way she had moved just slightly. I hadn't said anything, and neither had she, and yet everything about this moment felt like an invitation to something more, something I wasn't sure I was ready to face, but something I couldn't ignore. The silence between us was no longer just silence. It was full of the space she had left, a presence that had filled me completely, even without a single word. I had been trying to avoid her gaze for what felt like hours. It wasn't that I didn't want to look at her. It was that I didn't know what to do with the feelings that surged every time our eyes met. But this time, when I finally allowed myself to look, everything seemed to slow. The moment her eyes met mine, I felt it, the weight of it, the intensity of her gaze as it pierced through the veil of uncertainty I'd wrapped myself in. Her eyes weren't like anyone else's. They were dark, deep pools that seemed to pull me in, stripping away all the walls I had built around myself. She didn't look away, and neither did I. It was as if we were frozen in place, held by some unseen force, both of us unable to break the silent connection that had formed between us. There was a softness in her gaze, but there was something else, too, something I couldn't quite place. A quiet power, a knowing that left me feeling exposed in a way I wasn't used to. It was as if she could see right through me, past all the layers I had carefully placed. And yet, there was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding, only an invitation to explore whatever this was between us. I could feel my breath hitch, and for a moment, I was afraid I would say something, anything, that would break the delicate balance we had created. But I didn't speak. Instead, I held her gaze, letting myself be pulled deeper into the moment. The world outside of this moment seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us, caught in something that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, but something entirely new. It was as if we had crossed some threshold, a silent agreement between us. No words were needed. Her eyes, her presence, had already said everything. And in that brief moment, I realized that I wasn't just seeing her. I was feeling her, completely, unreservedly, and I couldn't look away. The room was still, but now there was something else, something unspoken that seemed to hum just beneath the surface. I wasn't sure when it had started, but the air between us had thickened, and I could feel it, even in the smallest movements. I hadn't meant to look, but there was something magnetic about the way she shifted, her hand brushing lightly against the edge of the table. It was subtle, almost accidental, but my eyes were drawn to the motion instantly. Her fingers moved across the surface, slow and deliberate, tracing the outline of the table like she was grounding herself. Each small movement of her hand seemed to echo in my chest, reverberating through me in a way that left me breathless. The way her fingers brushed the smooth wood, the way they seemed to glide effortlessly across the surface, it was intimate in a way that was hard to describe. Her touch wasn't rough or hurried. It was soft, languid, as if she had all the time in the world to explore the space around her. But it wasn't just the physical movement that drew me in, it was the way it made me feel. It was as though her touch was reaching for something deeper, something that I couldn't fully grasp, but couldn't ignore either. I tried to look away, to focus on something else, but the pull was too strong. I watched, unable to look anywhere else, as her fingers moved gently, as though they were being guided by something far more intimate than just the surface beneath them. The room was so quiet, yet it felt like her every movement was louder than anything I had ever heard. When she finally paused, her fingers lingering for just a second longer than necessary, my heart skipped a beat. It was a touch so small, so seemingly innocent, but in that moment, it was more than enough to send a shiver through me. I opened my mouth, but no words came. It was as if everything had been said in that brief, quiet exchange, and I was left, once again, feeling the weight of what we were beginning to share without ever speaking it aloud. She was barefoot again, and this time I couldn't look away. Her feet rested on the floor, her toes curled gently, as if they were seeking something in the coolness of the wood beneath her. I couldn't tell if it was intentional or if she had simply forgotten to put her shoes back on, but the bare vulnerability of her made something inside me shift. It wasn't just her feet, though. It was the way she sat, relaxed but somehow exposed in a way that made my heart race. There was a quiet strength in her stillness, but it was balanced by a tenderness I hadn't expected. She had let her guard down, just enough to let me see something real beneath the surface, the part of her that wasn't guarded, that wasn't trying to control the space between us. Her feet were placed naturally, one just slightly apart from the other, the soft curve of her arch visible as she shifted. The slight flex of her toes seemed to draw me in, as though they were reaching for me without actually moving. Every little movement felt deliberate, like she knew exactly what she was doing, even though there were no words exchanged. Her vulnerability was evident in the way she held herself, so open yet so unguarded. I felt a rush of something, a deep, almost painful longing, as I watched her. I had never seen her this way, so raw, so real. It was as if the world had faded, leaving just the two of us in this delicate, fragile moment. The space between us had closed, and yet there was still an unspoken distance I couldn't cross. I noticed the way her foot moved, how she shifted slightly, brushing the floor with the softest pressure, a subtle movement that made my pulse quicken. The air around us felt charged, heavy with the awareness that we were both existing in this moment, fully aware of the vulnerability that hung between us. I wanted to reach out, to touch, but I stayed still, unsure if it was my place to break the silence, unsure if I was ready to cross into that space. The weight of her gaze was heavier than anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just the way her eyes held mine. It was the way she seemed to see right through me, as if she knew every thought, every hesitation, every feeling that I had tried so hard to bury. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding, only a quiet invitation to let go, to be seen. I couldn't look away, even if I'd wanted to. Her stare wasn't intense in the way I expected. It was softer, almost like a caress, but it was no less powerful. It settled into me, settling into the very marrow of my bones, a presence that could not be ignored. It felt like she was waiting for something, but I didn't know what. The silence between us deepened, stretched taut with the weight of her gaze, the unsaid words hanging in the air, thick with anticipation. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, but it didn't matter. The moment felt suspended in time, like we were both caught in the space between two heartbeats. Her feet were still resting on the floor, relaxed, bare, her toes curling ever so slightly as she watched me. Each movement of hers felt amplified, as though the softest flex of her toes or the slightest shift of her body could send everything tumbling down or into something completely new. Her gaze never wavered. It was as if she had placed some kind of quiet weight on me, a responsibility, a challenge to meet her in this space, to let go of the distance between us, even if neither of us knew where it would lead. I could feel my heart beating louder now, the air between us thick with everything that was left unsaid. My body responded to her gaze in ways I couldn't explain, a subtle ache building in the quiet that I didn't know how to handle. She wasn't just watching me. She was drawing me in, making me feel every inch of the space between us, making me want to close the distance. But I stayed still, rooted in place, unable to break the tension. The weight of her gaze held me there, unable to escape, yet unwilling to. A moment too long. That's what it felt like, the quiet stretching out between us. Neither of us moved, and yet everything was moving. The pulse of the room, the weight of her gaze, the electric hum that filled the space. It was too much, and yet it wasn't enough. Each second dragged by, slow and deliberate, like the ticking of a clock that only we could hear. I couldn't look away, couldn't bring myself to break the silence. The air felt thick, dense with the understanding that we were teetering on the edge of something I couldn't name. The soft flex of her feet, the way she shifted just slightly, reminded me how close she was, how close we were. But there was still a distance, an unspoken line neither of us had crossed. And in that moment, I felt it all. The yearning, the longing, the unfulfilled tension. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, unblinking, as though daring me to move, to say something, to close the space between us. But I stayed still, frozen in the wake of her presence. The weight of the moment felt suffocating, and yet there was something so magnetic about it, something that drew me in deeper despite my hesitation. I could hear my heartbeat now, louder than ever, in time with the slow rhythm of her breath. The quiet was deafening, a moment too long, and yet there was something beautifully unbearable about it. Her presence filled the space, filled the silence, and I could feel myself sinking into it, unable to escape. My body was tense, every nerve on edge, and I wanted to reach for her, wanted to cross the gap between us. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed rooted, feeling the weight of the silence, the pull of her gaze, knowing that whatever came next, whatever this was between us, was not something that could be rushed. A moment too long, but it felt like the only one that mattered. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hall, breaking the stillness, but somehow only deepening the silence that hung between us. Each step was deliberate, measured, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound of her movement was louder than it should have been. It was as though every footfall was reverberating not just through the house, but through me, each echo ringing with unspoken thoughts, with all the things we hadn't yet said. I heard her pause just beyond the door, and for a moment there was only the sound of my own breath filling the space, heavy and thick. I could imagine her standing there, just outside, the air between us thickening again. There was no need for words now, no need for the usual formalities. It was as if we both knew that nothing could go back to the way it was before, that everything had shifted, even in the quietest of moments. Her footsteps resumed, closer now, slower this time, like she was testing the space between us, allowing the sound of her movement to fill the gap. I could feel each step, each pause, as though she were drawing closer, but not too quickly, just enough to make the tension grow. I could hear her breathing now, steady, deliberate, and it mirrored mine in the quiet of the hall. My pulse quickened, and the simple act of her walking toward me felt like a declaration, like the start of something that neither of us could stop. She was close now, and I couldn't tell if it was the proximity or the anticipation that made my chest tighten. The room had gone even quieter, as though everything had suspended itself, waiting for her to step into it, for her to move into the space we had created with nothing more than a glance, a shift of her feet, a breath shared between us. When her presence filled the doorway, I didn't move. I couldn't. My breath caught in my throat as her eyes met mine again, and in that moment, her footsteps, though quiet, carried the weight of everything unsaid, everything we had yet to face. The air was different now, charged with something I hadn't known how to name before. She was closer than before, but not in the way I had expected. It wasn't just the physical space between us that had shrunk. It was something more, something deeper, something that settled over us like a quiet storm. Her gaze met mine again, steady and unwavering, and I could feel the shift, the change in the atmosphere that had followed her closer steps. The distance was no longer just measured in feet, but in something more intimate, something felt in the very core of me. It was like we had crossed a line, one we hadn't even realized was there until it was already behind us. She was still barefoot, the soft curve of her feet visible beneath the edge of her jeans. It wasn't just her feet that I noticed now. It was the way she stood, the way she held herself, as though the space between us no longer mattered. I could feel her presence, thick and undeniable, drawing me in closer, forcing me to confront the quiet tension that had built between us. Every small movement she made seemed amplified now. The way her fingers curled slightly at her sides, the soft sound of her breathing filling the space. The room felt warmer somehow, even with the silence stretching between us. I could feel my own heart beating faster, my pulse quickening with the closeness, the weight of what had changed in these few moments. We weren't speaking, but we didn't need to. The air between us hummed with the things we both understood but hadn't said aloud. She was closer than before, and yet I felt as if I were still on the edge, still unsure of how to move forward, still uncertain of where this was leading. But the pull was undeniable, and I couldn't seem to break away from it. I stayed rooted to the spot, unsure whether to step closer, unsure if I was ready to face what came next. But it didn't matter. Her presence was all around me now, leaving me breathless, caught between what had been and what was yet to come. There was a pull between us now, undeniable and magnetic, as if every inch of the space between us had been charged with something neither of us could resist. I could feel in my chest, in my breath, in the way the air seemed to thicken every time she moved. Every step she took, every glance she cast in my direction, seemed to tug me closer, though I was still standing still, uncertain of how to bridge the gap. Her presence was overwhelming in the best way, and the quiet tension that hung in the room felt both exhilarating and suffocating. I wanted to move toward her, to close the space that had always been between us, but there was something holding me back, something almost sacred in the silence that surrounded us. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the weight of everything unsaid, everything that had built up in these moments of quiet intimacy. It felt like stepping forward would change everything, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. She shifted again, and this time her foot brushed against the floor, the softest sound, but it was enough to make my heart stutter. She was so close that I could feel the heat of her skin, even across the distance. Her eyes met mine again, steady and full of something I couldn't quite place, but that seemed to pull at me, beckoning me forward. It was like we were both caught in the pull, neither of us willing to take the final step, but both of us unable to ignore it. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was charged, alive with the understanding that something was about to change, something was already changing, and neither of us could pretend it wasn't happening. My breath quickened as I stood there, the pull between us tightening with each passing second. I wanted to reach out, wanted to bridge the gap that had been stretched between us for so long, but I didn't know how. It wasn't a question of will. It was a question of timing, of whether either of us was ready to face the pull that had been building in the quiet. There was something unspoken between us, something that lingered in the air, thick and heavy, yet unsaid. It wasn't just the quiet that stretched between us. It was the understanding that we both felt it, the pull that neither of us could ignore, yet neither of us was quite ready to address. I watched her, the way she held herself, poised but with a slight tension in her posture, as though she, too, could feel the weight of everything unsaid. Her eyes darted to mine briefly, then away, as though she were trying to decipher the same thing I was. The silence hung, stretched too long, but it didn't feel awkward. It felt necessary, like a pause before something that couldn't be undone. She shifted again, a subtle movement, but enough to make the space between us feel smaller. Her bare feet, now relaxed against the floor, were the first thing I noticed, and again, the quiet vulnerability of it caught me. The way she was so open, so exposed in a way that made everything else feel fragile, like the silence, like the air itself, was something delicate that could shatter with just a single word. Or perhaps with no word at all. I could feel my heart racing, but there was no escape from the tension. It wasn't about what she had done or what I hadn't said. It was about something more primal, more instinctual that had been building between us. And yet, despite the pull, despite the magnetic force that seemed to draw me closer, I stayed still, watching her, wondering if she too was feeling the same thing. The quiet had become a language of its own, speaking louder than any words could. And even though I couldn't quite understand everything it was telling me, I knew one thing for sure. We were both standing at the edge of something, teetering between the safety of silence and the unknown of what might come if we let ourselves break it. Something unspoken, something profound, lingered in the space between us. And though neither of us moved, it was clear that whatever was coming, it was inevitable. Her silence held more weight than any words ever could. It wasn't an uncomfortable quiet, but rather one that enveloped us, thick with meaning and unspoken understanding. There was something about the stillness of the room, the absence of sound, that made every movement, every shift in her posture feel amplified, more intense. It was as if she had mastered the art of silence, using it as a tool to draw me in, to make every moment between us feel heavy with possibility. I couldn't look away from her. Even though she hadn't spoken, her presence spoke volumes. The way her eyes held mine, soft but intense, was enough to make my chest tighten. There was something in her gaze that told me she knew exactly what this silence was doing to me, knew exactly the way it made my heart race. And still, she didn't break it. Her bare feet rested on the floor, the curve of her toes visible beneath the soft fabric of her jeans. The simplicity of the gesture was something I couldn't stop thinking about. The way she was so completely unguarded, so exposed in her vulnerability. And yet, there was power in that vulnerability. She had a way of making her silence seem intentional, calculated, as if every pause, every quiet second between us was leading us somewhere. I could feel the weight of it in the air, the unspoken connection that had formed between us in the absence of words. She wasn't forcing anything, wasn't pushing for anything. She was simply there in the moment, and it was enough. I wanted to speak, wanted to say something to break the silence, but the power of it held me back. I didn't need to fill the space with anything. Her presence, her silence, was enough. It was a language all its own, one that I understood, one that told me more than any conversation ever could. And in that moment, I realized that the power of her silence was stronger than anything I could have said. Her breath was steady, almost rhythmic, yet I could feel it in the stillness of the room. It wasn't loud, but it was there, soft and deliberate, like a pulse that moved through the quiet. I could sense it in the air, just as I could sense the slight rise and fall of her chest. It was as if her breath was in sync with my own heartbeat, a quiet connection that had formed without either of us speaking a word. I was acutely aware of the space between us, of the way the silence had stretched into something that no longer felt awkward but necessary. The tension wasn't uncomfortable now. It had become part of the rhythm between us, like two separate beats coming together, pulsing in the same steady cadence. Her breath, so quiet, so measured, seemed to mirror the rapid beat of my heart, each one echoing the other. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her, the way she moved so subtly with each breath. The gentle exhale of air that passed through her lips was like a soft invitation. The weight of her gaze was still on me, though she didn't need to look at me to make me feel it. I felt the connection in every fiber of my being, like we were no longer two separate people, but a single rhythm, pulsing together, out of sync with the rest of the world. My heartbeat quickened as I felt the air grow warmer, the space between us growing smaller. It wasn't just the physical proximity, it was the energy between us, the magnetic pull that had only intensified in the absence of words. I could feel her breath on my skin now, even though she hadn't moved. It wasn't the closeness that mattered, but the way everything in the room seemed to hinge on that moment, on the way her breath, so soft, matched the pounding of my own heartbeat. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I simply breathed in the air between us, feeling the pull, feeling the heartbeat that was now not just mine, but hers as well. The moment her hand brushed against mine, everything else seemed to fade. It was just the soft pressure of her touch, nothing more, but it carried with it something that lingered long after she pulled away. It wasn't a gesture meant to claim or demand, but simply one of connection, an offering that existed in the quiet space between us. The warmth of her skin was still there, as though her touch had left an imprint on me that wouldn't fade. I could still feel the soft pressure of her fingers, the slight tremor in her hand when it made contact with mine. It wasn't accidental, not really. It was a conscious movement, a choice, a deliberate crossing of a line that neither of us had been willing to cross until now. And in that moment, it felt like everything we hadn't said was spoken in that touch. I could feel it in my chest, that gentle ache, the way her touch had stirred something deep within me. I had expected it to be fleeting, to fade as quickly as it had come, but it didn't. The feeling of her fingers brushing mine stayed with me, like an echo that wouldn't quite fade. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, something that reached deeper than skin, something that connected us in a way I couldn't explain. Her touch lingered in the air, and I found myself unable to shake it, unable to ignore the way it had shifted everything between us. The space felt different now, charged with the memory of her hand against mine, the soft reminder of what was now possible, of what we had both been too afraid to acknowledge before. I wanted to reach for her, to close the gap, but I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch again, allowing her touch to settle into me, letting it be enough for now. Something had changed. It wasn't just the physical connection, it was the understanding that something deeper had been shared, something that would linger long after the moment had passed. And for once, I didn't feel the need to fill the space with words. Her touch had already said it all. The distance between us was unraveling, thread by thread, as if every quiet moment had slowly pulled the strands apart until there was nothing left but the raw tension that had once held us apart. I could feel in the way we stood now, closer than before but still hesitant, as if we both sensed the shift, yet neither knew how to fully embrace it. Her eyes were on me again, soft but searching, as if waiting for something to give, some signal that I was ready to cross the final line. I felt the pressure of her gaze, not demanding, but patient, as though she knew that this moment, this very quiet space between us, was everything we had been building toward. I could hear her breath again, steady and measured, and I wondered if she could feel the way my heart raced in time with it. We were caught in the same rhythm now, as though the distance between us had already disappeared, and yet, here we were, suspended in that final beat, waiting for it to fall. I took a step forward, though it felt like the smallest movement. It wasn't enough to close the space entirely, but it was enough to feel the shift, enough to break the hold that silence had kept on us for so long. Her gaze softened, just the slightest hint of a smile playing at the corner of her lips, as if she, too, felt the shift. Another step, and I could feel the warmth of her presence again, the familiar comfort of her that had always been just out of reach. The pull between us was undeniable now, the distance a mere memory, unraveling in the wake of the quiet that had once held us back. She didn't move, not yet, but the way she looked at me, open, waiting, ready, told me everything I needed to know. I was no longer afraid to close the distance between us. The silence was no longer a barrier. It had become the bridge. And with each passing second, I felt the last thread of hesitation unravel completely. The moment hung between us, suspended, as if the world had paused just for us. I could feel the breath we both held, the anticipation thick in the air, and yet neither of us moved. It wasn't fear that kept us still. It was the understanding that this moment was fragile, fleeting, and anything we did could change everything. Her gaze was steady on mine, intense yet soft, and I felt it, that unspoken connection that had been building slowly and quietly in the spaces between us. I could see it now in the way her chest rose and fell, her breath matching mine in quiet harmony. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt like a shared space, a shared understanding, as if we had both come to this point without needing words. I took a step closer, slowly, almost cautiously, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she met me halfway, her presence overwhelming in the best way. I could feel the air between us shift, the electric charge of what was coming, what was already happening. The distance was gone now, and I could feel her warmth, the subtle pressure of her body close to mine. My breath caught again, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of everything we hadn't said, everything that was now understood. We were no longer two separate beings. We were something else now, something that had been forged in the quiet, in the space where our unspoken words had lived. And then, just as softly, she reached out. Her hand grazed my arm, a simple touch, but it was everything. It was the promise of what was to come, of what we had both known all along but hadn't yet dared to claim. In that moment, the breath we had both held was finally released, and with it, the understanding that this was no longer just silence. It was something more, something real, something we had both quietly longed for. And as our eyes met again, I realized that whatever came next, we would face it together, with the weight of this shared breath between us.